Welcome everybody to today's webinar on common violations found during RCRA inspections. I'm Jim Dyke-Ice, and I'll be the moderator and host today. And it's interesting, as we come out of the COVID restrictions, I recently made my first post-COVID business trip, and it was good, if not a bit interesting. I forgot my computer power cord. I was gone an entire week, so I worked on my phone for most of the week. And then when I checked out on Friday morning, I forgot about half my clothes in the hotel. So I hope you can learn from me as you prepare for your first business trips, or if you've been making them, I don't know, but let's just have that be our first poll. I'll publish it right now. With the gradual return to the new COVID normal, have you already traveled for business this year? Go ahead and just kind of let's see what people are doing. I know some states have been, California, New York, I think just came out of it yesterday. So it's ranging, okay. Pretty close to 3/4 no and 25%. All right, we'll let this run for just a couple more seconds. Get your vote in. All right, I will end the poll right now. So yeah, we had 78% have not traveled yet. That's very interesting. So yeah, learn from my mistakes, as we say. And that's kind of what we're trying to go for today as we look at our content and topic for today. Pleased to introduce myself and our two speakers. I've been with Veolia about 37 years in various sales and management responsibilities, and I've known both Tom and Kevin throughout my time here. Introducing Kevin first, he is our Director of Environment and Transportation. We've split up the EHS&T functions. Certainly pertinent to how he started his career to this webinar. Back in 1986, he was a environmental auditor, hazardous waste inspector with the Texas Water Commission, which is now the TCEQ. He's been with Veolia now for 30 years, starting as an environmental compliance officer, and then now as Director of Environment and Transportation. His responsibilities include managing our 10 geographic branches and the EHS&T managers in those branches. So that's, you know, internal audits, third-party audit programs, reviewing, summarizing, and commenting on regulatory rulemakings, along with assisting branch ESH&T managers on compliance issues. Tom Daly, can give a wave there. He's been with Veolia for 27 years. So I think if you add the three of us up, we're just under 100 years with the company. And so he started as a project manager, and then as one of our branch EHS&T managers in our central branch, which is kind of the Midwest United States. Some specific things he did there was renewing a 10-year Part B permit, which can be a daunting task, as you know. Also developing a nationwide DEA reverse distributor program. And then, of course, he's done other things like internal and external compliance audits, again, applicable to what we're talking about today. And he's currently with our corporate environmental and compliance department. So those are the speakers. Couple of housekeeping comments. Tom and Kevin are going to walk us through the content. We think it's about 40 minutes. And then there should be at least 10 minutes at the end for your questions. So this is why we are happy that you joined us today. So please engage. Just submit those using chat, and I will be tracking those while Tom and Kevin are speaking, and then I'll pass those questions on at the end. We are recording the webinar, so watch your inbox. A couple hours later today, we'll send you the slide deck and PDF, as well as a recording on the YouTube link. We may move our little thumbnails to not cover up content from time to time, and I may turn my camera off while Tom and Kevin speak so that they have your full attention. And if there's any massive technical difficulties, I would hit a reset button, and it'd be just kind of resetting the instance of the webinar. But I'd have to see like chats from 50 of you that you can't hear us or something like that. So with that, let's go ahead and get started on today's content. I will do a brief overview on the company. Many of you are customers and many of you are not, so I don't want to assume that you know it, what we provide. And then we're going to get into this, the 9 areas of concern that we've, through our research, have kind of said, these are areas that most companies struggle with. And for each of those 9 areas, we're going to go through non-compliant conditions, potential violations, and best practices. And then, of course, at the end, we'll have questions and answers. Brief presentation. Our legal department always encourages me to put this in. I didn't put it in mouse type, so you can't actually read it, but it says, we are providing information. We're not providing legal advice. If you have legal questions, please consult your own legal environmental attorney. Okay, so just quickly, Veolia is a global company with 3 divisions: water, waste, and energy. Trying more and more to deliver those 3 services to a broader range of customers, focusing on sustainable solutions. You can see just about $30 billion in revenue last year, 181,000 employees, and then the breakout of our different geographic areas. North America for us includes Canada and the US, and just a little over $2 billion in revenue with about 6,900 employees. And Kevin, thanks for moving the thumbnail for me. Specifically on the hazardous waste business is, here's our map of our service offerings. And what we just like to say is we offer a broad range of on-site services where we come onto your facility. And we also operate treatment, storage, and disposal facilities. And you can see some of them there. You may know us for incineration, solvent reclaim, fuel blending, our new landfill and stabilization, but then also things, on-site services, total waste management, things like that, lab packing where we come on site. If you got any waste challenges, we'd love to talk with you about it. But now on to today's topic. And Kevin and Tom, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Jim. This is Kevin McGrath. I'll start out, and good morning, everyone. Thought we would start this with kind of a case study of a recent enforcement action that EPA had with a company. As you can see, quite a significant fine for that company. This was a large quantity generator that was inspected by EPA in early 2020, first quarter of 2020. And this enforcement action was finalized earlier this year. Not a very large company, but a manufacturing warehouse facility with under 100 employees, actually under 75 employees, that had spent solvents and some caustic wastes that they managed on site. They accumulated the solvents in a large tote, kind of intermediate bulk container, and during the inspection, there was a direct feed into that tote, and there were gaps between where the hose went into the opening on the tote, and EPA observed during it that visible gap around the fill pipe. They had an odor of solvents or organics, and they used an infrared camera that identified vapor emissions as well. And since they did use tank containers, they did have a pump, 7 valves, and 7 connectors that should have been managed under EPA's organic emissions program, subpart BB, and it was not being operated in compliance with EPA's requirements. As you can see here, 15 violations. EPA lumped them into 2 different categories. The first and most telling, which we see at times when people manage their wastes, they say here that they are operated as a TFSDF without a permit. Obviously, to me, that means they stored waste on site for greater than 90 days. If they had been removing their waste from site within 90 days, they would still be under the large quantity generator requirements. But now they the enforcement action, they're operating without a permit. The permit requirements include additional requirements. So then this kind of snowballs into multiple violations. But in specific, just to mention some of those 15 violations: not dating hazardous waste accumulation containers, not labeling them, failure to maintain aisle space, failure to close containers. And then you go with the organic air emissions, not monitoring the pumps, not conducting weekly visual inspections, not properly calibrating the equipment to do the monitoring. So multiple things that then come into that as well. Also failure to list the update information on the emergency coordinator in the contingency plan. And then common violation of universal waste management. And they had a few issues with the universal waste management as well. So as you can see, something very small, not a very large generator, but once the violations started coming in, they kind of accumulated, and this company obviously paid a very large fine for that. So hopefully with this, we'll take a look at some common areas where we see violations. You'll see these 9 areas listed here. I'm not going to go through them because we'll go through each of these individually. But do want to note that we're going to have information on slides that we may not cover, but the slides will be available for after this meeting. So you can use those slides if you would want in trainings at your facility. So we'll jump right into the first violation area: universal wastes. You'll see publications that at this point in time, these are kind of the #1 violations that EPA and states are identifying when they do hazardous waste inspections. And why is that? What are universal wastes? They're fluorescent light bulbs, mercury containing equipment, used batteries, aerosol cans that are now a part of this. And they're common to most generators. One issue we see is people kind of get this thought in their head that once it becomes a universal waste, it's no longer a hazardous waste, when that in fact is not the case. It is a hazardous waste, must be a hazardous waste first before it can be a universal waste. But EPA made kind of reduced requirements for the management of these universal waste because they consider them universal. So they put less requirements on them for us that are different than the regular hazardous waste regulations. So we look at this first picture. What are some of the issues here? Obviously, these fluorescent bulbs that we see here are not properly containerized. They don't have labels. Containers are open. Obviously, quite a few issues here. So what are the best practices for managing universal waste? I would say the first thing is have a plan for the management of your universal waste. A lot of times these, the fluorescent lamps, the batteries are picked up by the maintenance department. They go into the maintenance department. We don't think of that as part of our hazardous waste operations. So we're not inspecting, we're not looking at it, we're not ensuring those containers are properly closed. So have a plan for the management of your universal wastes. Make sure your containers are in good condition. They're closed. A lot of companies, you're getting rid of your waste. You've got the nice fluorescent box for your new tubes, and you use that as an outbound box as well. But the hand punch for carrying it, you punch that out. That's now an open container. Make sure you cover that. Or you don't secure the lids on those universal waste containers when you're storing them. So make sure those are closed. Make sure the wastes are properly labeled with an accumulation start date. You do have 1 year to accumulate those wastes, but you have to have some means to show that they have been disposed of within a year. So make sure those markings are on there, the date of accumulation is on there, and make sure that you're conducting inspections monthly to ensure that your facilities are properly managing these wastes. And now, Tom Daly.
Thanks, Kevin. The next common area is waste determinations. Under RCRA generators are the first critical link in ensuring safe management of hazardous waste. They are the cradle in the cradle to grave system. The first and most important step in the regulations is for generators of solid waste to determine whether their waste is also hazardous. If a generator fails to properly identify their waste, it has the potential to result in damage to human health or the environment. As a result, the success of the hazardous waste regulatory program really depends in a great extent on generators making accurate hazardous waste determination. And this diagram here above identifies items that need to be reviewed when making a waste determination. And I'll go through and discuss potential violations as well as best practices related to these items in the next two slides. So common violations, first of all, just lack of documentation to support the generator knowledge. I kind of liken this to the lottery effect. So if I'm the one making the waste determination and I win the lottery and quit tomorrow, I need to make sure that the basis for the waste determinations are properly documented for the next EHS person or regulatory agency. Next is inaccurate determination or misclassified as non-hazardous. So it's important to make sure we properly identify your waste. If we've got a waste stream that has a pH of 13 and we misidentify that as non-RCRA regulated, that's going to be a cause for a violation. The lack of information about the generation process and chemistry, we need to know as generators what materials are used in the production, and that helps us determine what waste are then going to be generated. And then the last is the lack of recharacterization after a process change. So we need to be on the lookout for suspicious or new raw materials that are accepted into our facilities, and then make a new determination if we see them as being used in the process of our production facilities. When we take a look at best practices, we need to identify that waste analysis plans and waste characterization are part of the national emphasis program enforcement emphasis by EPA. This flow diagram can be used as an overly simplified process when making your waste determinations, but don't think that this by all means covers every step. When we take a look at the determination in the hazardous waste generator improvement regulations, there were certain areas that were clarified as far as the requirements. They include the fact that a hazardous and solid waste determination must be accurate to ensure proper management. Additionally, a haz waste determination must be made at the point of generation before any dilution, mixing, or other alterations of the waste occurs. And additionally, at any time in the course of its management that it has or may have been changed its properties as a result of either exposure to the environment or other factors. Acceptable generator knowledge that can be utilized in that waste determination include the origins of the waste, composition, the process producing the waste, and the feedstocks used. Keep in mind, for record-keeping requirements, we need to keep documentation for a minimum of 3 years. Additionally, small and large quantity generators do also need to identify the waste codes associated with hazardous waste. And then the last key is just, again, document. You can never have too much information on these waste determinations. With that, I'll turn it back over to Kevin for the next topic.
Thanks, Tom. Next issue that we see common violations in is the generator categories. I think everybody on this call is probably familiar with the 3 categories, but the very small quantity generators generate less than 220 pounds of hazardous waste in a month and store less than 2,200 pounds at any one point in time. Small quantity generators, greater than 220, less than 2,200 pounds, store greater than 13,200 pounds, and in general must ship those wastes off-site within 180 days. And then the large quantity generator or 90-day generators generate greater than 2,200 pounds in a month and can store those wastes on site for up to 90 days. The picture we show here is for the very small quantity generator category. And this picture is just showing the states that are more stringent than the federal regulations. So there are states that do require EPA ID numbers, do require VSQGs basically to be a small quantity generator, ship using hazardous waste, manifest, those things. But important thing to note here is with the current EPA kind of workforce, where they're going to, they're looking at as much electronic information as possible and utilizing that information to kind of conduct inspections without going out to facilities. We are contacted routinely by EPA or the states where they have reviewed the e-manifest data or biennial reports, and they believe that a VSQG should be a small quantity generator, or small quantity generators are shipping off so much waste at a point in time, should they be a large quantity generator? So just kind of a heads up thought process for everyone here is EPA has been very public about the fact that they are going to use as much electronic information to conduct inspections as possible instead of having to go out to facilities. So know they're reviewing that information and reaching out to us and generators to ensure they're actually operating at the level that they are stating. Again, this what are the common violations and best practices? Obviously, common violations are exceeding the quantity of generator that you're notifying as, and having conducted your trainings and record keeping and everything else as a part of and your policies, procedures. So if you're a VSQG that you've notified EPA, but you're actually operating as a small quantity generator, have you put in those additional requirements to be a small quantity generator? Some of those include VSQGs don't need to use a hazardous waste manifest, don't need to obtain an EPA ID number. Are you actually, have you obtained that? And are you using manifest and LDR forms if you're a small quantity generator? Are you conducting weekly inspections? Are you keeping actual inventory logs and training that gets, training requirements become more onerous the larger the quantity generator you are, along with contingency plans, emergency notification, preparedness, prevention. We'll get into some of that a little later, but just wanted to, that's kind of the common violations, and the best practices. Know and keep track of the waste you're generating and ensure you're operating under those, the quantity generator you have notified of. If your operations increase, you've moved up to a larger category, implement the requirements to be in that category and notify EPA or the state of your increased generator status. So Tom's going to take over the next category.
Thanks, Kevin. The next area is marking and labeling. And when I think of marking and labeling, I think of this as being the kind of the low-hanging fruit for inspectors. If they come through your facility and go through your waste area and see a drum or a container without any marking, labeling, or no hazardous waste labels on there, that's going to be pretty easy for them to identify that as a potential for a violation. So in addition to missing the words hazardous waste, some other non-compliant conditions would be no indication of the contents of the hazards of the contents of the container. Again, this was clarified or a requirement of the hazardous waste generator improvement regulations. This can be accomplished by either a DOT label or placard by OSHA HAZCOM hazard statement or pictogram, or an NFPA type hazard warning label. Additionally, concern areas would be no accumulation start date or missing start dates, either a satellite accumulation container or a central accumulation container, or a tank either used to accumulate hazardous waste. Additionally, if we are managing used oil on site under the 40 CFR 273 used oil regulations, that container or tank should be marked as used oil and not waste oil. Some best practices then to counteract those non-compliant conditions include the obvious: just do the opposite. Make sure that we are marking all containers with the words hazardous waste and the indication of the hazards of the contents. Accumulation start dates, remember on satellite accumulation is when the container is full. When we date it, and then we've got 3 days to move it to the central accumulation area. For central accumulation containers, we need to put a date on that container, the date the first drop is placed in that container. Same with tanks when we're accumulating into waste tanks, and also to have supporting documentation to support, when we're adding waste and when, if so, we're removing waste if we don't empty it out completely. Used oil, I kind of mentioned that. That's a little unique labeling, the used oil as opposed to waste oil. Make sure that we're using DOT compliant containers and that they're marked, we'll see with the proper shipping name, labels and marking requirements, and make sure that there is no conflicting labels or markings. A case where this comes about is if we're reusing an emptied product drum. We need to make sure that there's no conflicting labels. For example, if we are using an emptied isopropyl alcohol drum and we're collecting waste acetone in that container, certainly would be compatible. However, we need to make sure we're, covering up any incorrect markings that may be on that container. Next, back to Kevin.
Next topic we're going to discuss, waste accumulation and storage. Obviously, we're going to start with some pictures here. These are violations that we see often when we're at generator sites or with the condition of containers that are received at our facility when shipped from the generator sites. But we'll start on the top left. Obviously, an open container. You can see there's no bung in that container, along with what appears to be waste on the top of that drum as well. Hazardous waste requirements that you have a closed container except when adding or removing waste. Obviously, no one is there adding waste at this point in time, so a violation. The one below that, funnel open on a container. You can use the funnels, especially in satellite accumulation areas for the accumulation of waste, but same condition applies when no one is actively adding or removing waste. You need to close that funnel. And it doesn't appear, at least from this picture, that there are any labels or markings on those containers, and obviously accumulation start dates. The drum in poor condition, don't normally see them in this poor of condition, but we do get some drums in pretty poor condition. And agencies inspect our facilities, and this is something they identify as violations for us. But rusted out containers, rusts on the exterior of containers, wastes on the exterior of containers. Those are all violations that we have received at our facilities from receiving generator waste, and obviously that container is not labeled as well. Go up to the upper right-hand corner. Tank, if that's a hazardous waste tank, you don't see what appears to be any hazardous waste identification on that. That is a hazardous waste storage container. You don't need to put the accumulation start date on tanks, but you need to keep a log to identify that accumulation start date. It also appears as you look at that there may be a spill either from the containment or from the containment and tank going down there. And these emissions from organic emissions from hazardous waste facilities is an enforcement initiative by EPA, which goes into the AABB regulations. If you don't know them and you have organic wastes in tanks, look them up. There's monitoring requirements, repair requirements. And this is something they're definitely looking at, something we need to be looking at as facilities as well. The picture underneath that, containers stored on pallets, different containers. Is there sufficient aisle space around those to move emergency equipment? Are they properly labeled? Are they leaking? Appears that some may be leaking. So multiple issues that it appears to be there. And then the last one, obviously aisle space again. We need to have adequate aisle space to move emergency equipment and personnel. So again, kind of going over these again, see if there's any that I missed. Labels not visible. Make sure that when we're storing containers that those labels are visible so an inspector can see them. Satellite accumulation areas. If we store greater than 55 gallons, you need to date those containers when they reach the 55-gallon accumulation limit. You need to move those to an accumulation area within 3 days. Central waste accumulation areas, again, common violations: exceeding the waste storage time limits, exceeding volume limits for VSQG or SQG wastes, inadequate aisle space, and inadequate inspections. Just a note that I have on that, had an inspection by an agency at a facility where we had our secondary containment was not in good condition, and they not only cited us for the secondary container or secondary containment by being in poor condition, but our inspection records did not state that it was in poor condition. So their citation to us was falsification of records, which sounds bad, is bad. That obviously that it's concrete secondary containment. It didn't happen the night before they got there. So we need to make sure our inspection records are complete and accurate as well. What are the recommendations? Train your employees on what they're managing. Obviously, the people that manage hazardous waste need to be trained, but train them on the inspection forms, not just the people that are doing the inspections, but the actual workers, so they understand why the requirements are there, why we need to close a drum at all times, except when we're actively adding waste, especially if they're moving it there multiple times in a day. Designate a storage area and segregate it out for the actual wastes that you're going to store in there. Paint lines to ensure you have adequate aisle space. If you have VSQG, SQG storage areas, post the maximum storage limits on the signage there so people are aware of that every time they walk in. Again, make sure we properly document inspections, as I just discussed. Inspect all storage areas, tanks, ancillary equipment, vents, pumps, universal waste storage areas, and then list non-compliance actions on your inspection reports. I think we quite often don't want to have a non-compliant situation on our inspection reports. So instead of documenting it and documenting how it was corrected, we just always have inspection reports that say everything was compliant. We may fix it right then. But if there is an issue, document it and document how you complete those corrections to make sure it's correct. And if you do have organic waste stored in tanks, containers, make sure you're meeting the inspection, monitoring, and corrective action requirements for those as well. And Tom will take the next topic.
Yeah, and the next topic we're going to talk about is waste manifest and shipments. Some common violations here include an incorrect generator EPID number. So we've got customers maybe that have multiple sites and therefore have multiple ID numbers. They're shipping from site A, but they incorrectly grabbed the ID number from site B. Another violation potentially is incorrect transporter ID number. This could be from just transposing 2 digits, so it was supposed to end in 1-2, and it was entered as ending in 2-1, or the ID number that we've entered as the transporter ID is not tied to a number that has a transporter license for that. Incorrect or incomplete container numbers, obviously incorrect piece count, 10% or variation or more in bulk or weight or volume do constitute significant discrepancies or differences on manifest and do need to be corrected. Failure to sign or date the manifest. We need to make sure that the generator is signing in the correct place, the transporter is signing in the correct place. They're not flip-flopping signatures, or generator is not signing where transporter 2 would normally sign, and to make sure that the date is entered completely. Information is not legible. This is where, if you're hand entering information on a manifest, make sure you're using a fine point pen. Make sure that it's legible. Obviously today's day and age with electronic manifest, it's highly recommended to use either typewriter or computer generated entries on manifest. And then failure to submit an exception report to an agency. That's going to be a low-hanging fruit if we can't prove that we've received that signed off manifest back within 45 days for a large quantity generator or 60 days for a small quantity generator. We need to make sure we're tracking those return copy dates. As far as the shipping itself, this comes down to the DOT marking and labeling of the containers. Make sure that the container has generator name and address. We've got the manifest tracking number on it. We've got a proper shipping name and ID number, and that it's all legible and associated with each other on the container itself. Some best practices then to avoid these common errors is really to generate a site-specific, standard operating procedure when it comes to your waste shipments, and that we can list out the steps necessary for that waste shipment, whether it's completing the paperwork, who's going to do that, make sure that they have proper training. We'll also have in that SOP identified out when we have ongoing waste streams, how we're going to set up those waste stream information profiles, what type of data we're going to have in the file to back up the information we have on those, as well as our information regarding the site, including the EPID number and address and emergency response information. Obviously, we want to comply with the DOT requirements that's given. And when it comes to that timekeeping, we need to have a systematic approach in place such that we can, if we have a shipment on June 17th, we've got a tickler that alerts us, in 35 days as a large quantity generator. If we have not received a confirmation that the disposal site has received that manifest, we need to start investigating, where is that shipment, and obviously within the 45-day then time frame for a large quantity generator, we need to submit an exception letter if we have not received a signed off copy. And probably just the last component there is just to double verify the information on your shipping documents as well as containers. So it's always a best practice to have a second person to kind of review the information and make sure that everything is legible and there are no missing areas on the form that could be identified as a potential violation down the road. Back to you, Kevin.
Thanks, Tom. Next topic, preparedness, prevention, emergency response, contingency plans. Kind of going to discuss that. And I'm going to start by jumping over to the lower right-hand corner of this slide, and discuss some of the different requirements based on the size generator. So if you're a very small quantity generator, these requirements are relatively small. Basically, your employees that work with hazardous waste need to be aware of the hazards, and they need to be able to know who to notify if there is an emergency. So not well documented, not written plans, but they need to be aware if there's an inspection of where the hazardous wastes are stored, who to contact if there's an emergency. Small quantity generators, it becomes a little more onerous, but they need to have emergency response information posted near a phone and at the hazardous waste areas. That's the emergency coordinator's information, a name and phone number, location of fire extinguishers, fire department phone numbers. So a little more onerous. And then if you're a large quantity generator, you need to have a written plan that includes your emergency coordinators, your emergency procedures, how you're going to do it, what equipment's there. So the requirements, again, get much more stringent. And what are the common violations we see, especially for the large quantity generators, small quantity generators that actually have to have something written? Number one, emergency coordinators not updated. You have the person that you identified as emergency coordinator get promoted into a new position, leave the company, whatever, and we don't update those coordinators and their telephone numbers, or they get a change of phone number and we don't update that information. Failure to make arrangements with or failure to notify the local authorities. That's required by the large quantity generators, that they kind of let the fire departments, fire department, police department, hospitals know of what the hazards are at that facility and what could happen. So we need to notify them. Also need to update those plans when changes are made. Your business expands, you move in a new direction, you update something you're doing, you create some new hazardous waste, a new hazardous waste area, and you don't update that on your plan. Emergency equipment either not listed in the contingency plan or it's missing. Quite often you go out in the springtime and you find shovels are missing from the emergency equipment because somebody's used it to shovel snow. It was readily available. They utilized it, didn't put it back. All of a sudden it's not there. Or they've used absorbent pads from a spill kit and all of a sudden it's not there. So we need to make sure, how do we make sure this happens? Obviously, periodically review and update your procedures, whether that's semi-annually, quarterly, best practice for whatever generator size you are and the turnover you have in your company. Have the coordinators been trained on how to respond to an incident? And do they have backing of the company to spend the money needed to respond to a hazardous waste incident? Inspect the emergency response equipment. Make sure it's all available. It's all where it's supposed to be. Call the phone numbers and make sure they're accurate, especially for if you have emergency response companies that you identify as being able to help you respond to an emergency in your contingency plan. Make sure you call those. Make sure you keep in touch with them. They could close a business, sell a business, and them change phone numbers, and all of a sudden they're not available as you would want them to be. And perform exercises, and if possible, include the emergency response personnel with you, especially fire departments. The fire departments do like to come out and know where you're storing your hazardous waste, your hazardous materials, so that they're normally open to coming onto a site and walking the facility and knowing where hazardous materials would be in the case of an emergency. Document your communications with the services, whether that's with certified mail getting to them, a letter that you hand deliver, and you document that, but those type of things. I do want to jump back a little bit when I was talking about this quantity generator size. One of the new requirements by the hazardous waste improvements rules is re-notification of the size generator that you are. Large quantity generators, that's easy. They conduct that as part of their biennial report. they are re-notifying that they're still a large quantity generator. However, a requirement was added for small quantity generators to re-notify every 4 years. And that is coming up on September 1st of 2021. All small quantity generators you're basically re-notifying EPA and the states that yes, you still are a small quantity generator, and that needs to be done using the 8712 forms. So just a requirement for those small quantity generators out there, you do have a re-notification time coming up quite soon. So just a few months away. And Tom?
So the next area we'll cover is employee training. Non-compliant conditions include, no training or didn't have adequate training. So here I always think about, do we have a good onboarding process for new employees to make sure that they are getting all that required training in a timely fashion? Certain personnel are not trained. So are we addressing contractors that are working on our sites or temporary agency employees, okay, or lack of an annual refresher? So let's say we have an 8-hour refresher scheduled for, June 17th, and I call in sick. Do we have the means to track down those who missed the training for one reason or another, and to make sure that we have makeup classes for those individuals? Inadequate training documentation or records that don't fully identify what was the information discussed in the training, or the time, the date, the trainer information, or the like. We need to make sure we have lists of names and job titles for all staff involved with hazardous waste, and make sure that we have good job descriptions that cover all the roles that we've identified are associated with the waste management on site, and ensure that we have a written training program. Okay, so that kind of leads into the best practices, which again are just that. We want to develop a written training program, so we've got every job title and description on site that has a hazardous waste role at our facilities, identified what are their training requirements, who's going to give that training. So if it's a broad topic such as a record refresher, maybe EHS department is. If it's a site-specific standard operating procedure, maybe it's going to be the area manager on a tailgate meeting providing that training. Ensure that we're covering all regulatory requirements, right? Training, whether it's EPA, DOT, OSHA, permit requirement, required trainings, or any state requirement trainings. Make sure we're keeping good documentation and employee sign-in sheets and documenting trainer credentials. And we have a good onboarding process to grab new employees and get them trained in a good, timely fashion with the information that they need to perform their job safely. Kind of a carrot to that would be like publishing a training calendar. Maybe if you develop an LMS, which stands for Learning Management System, where we can document that training. A lot of these are electronically. We can even go in and set up training, schedule training sessions and assign them to certain individuals, as well as, assign alerts when an employee is coming due for certain trainings. So it kind of gives both the employee, maybe their supervisor, as well as whoever is providing that training a heads up. Back to you, Kevin.
Thanks. And this is going to be our last topic that we're going to discuss today. But regulatory changes. Very important that generators keep up with the changes in regulations. On the left-hand side there's 4 regulations that have been revised in the last few years on a federal level. The Hazardous Waste Generator Improvements Rule. Tom and I discussed a couple of the new requirements that are a part of that rule. The TRI reporting of PFAS materials, 172 materials, I do believe, that if they're managed above the threshold levels, need to be included in our TRI reporting, and that's due July 1st of this year for management of those chemicals in the reporting year of 2020. So if you aren't aware of that and you do TRI reporting or you manage PFAS materials, you should probably be looking into that now. Also, there's new aerosol universal waste regulations, added those to the universal waste rules, and new pharmaceutical waste regulations. All of those are out there. Some of them, specifically the aerosols and pharmaceutical waste rules, less stringent than what had been in the previous regulations. So it's not mandatory that states adopt the regulations, or there's time periods they give them to adopt the regulations depending on the regulation. But it's also important that we keep up with the state adoption of federal regulations to ensure that, you know, when it becomes adopted in your state, you're complying with the rules. You don't want to be notified by the inspector when they show up of these new changes. So how do you do that? You need to stay up to date with the regulations. You can review Federal Register's state regulatory updates, and you could go online and do those search yourself. You can purchase a commercial regulatory monitoring services that will give you updates on a periodic basis, whether it's daily, weekly, monthly, of here are the changes that have happened in the federal regulations or in state regulations. You can pick that as well. Obviously, those are costly, but that's a way you can keep up. And a plug for our marketing department here. They do publish a monthly newsletter. And as part of that monthly newsletter, the environmental department here at Veolia does publish a regulatory update, federal and state regulations. So it is available. It's out there, and you're available to do that. And before I go back to Jim here, just reminder again, re-notification of small quantity generators must be done by September 1. E-manifest, paper manifests are no longer allowed to be submitted to EPA. That's more of a TSD issue than a generator issue, but the fully paper manifests will no longer be allowed starting June 30th of this year as well. And with that, I think Jim's going to wrap us up.
Yep. Thanks, Kevin. Everybody, I did just make a file available that you can download. It is a CFR link to the regulations for each of the 9 points that we covered today. So we can go ahead and, if you'd like to download that, you can. In interest of time, I'm going to skip the key takeaways. Compliance is our job. I'll just do that as the summary and go right to the questions, because we have had quite a few. So they kind of scrolled through the topics as we went through it. Are PCB ballasts considered to be universal waste in the United States?
No, they are not.
Okay. Here's an interesting one. If, and the if was capitalized, if you have misclassified a waste as non-hazardous, should you self-report the error, or just going forward dispose of it properly?
You should self-report that violation. It would obviously be much better to notify the agency and let them know you made the mistake than it is to have them find it out and come back at you. But that's obviously a moral and ethical question that each one of you is going to have to decide for yourself.
All right. Here's kind of a question. It looks like it may be specific to a state. I've had training in the past that stated accumulation for acutely toxic waste for VSQGs was 2.2 pounds total, not per month. Is the per month accurate in Wisconsin?
It's 2.2 pounds per month and never accumulating more than 2.2 pounds.
Okay.
Thanks for shaking your head, Tom.
Here's one. Your thoughts on storing an empty drum in queue to be used when in-process drum is full. Maybe that's a question around labeling. I'm not exactly sure what they were asking.
It's just going to raise concerns with a regulator that would look at it and see it waiting there to be processed. I would say you leave an empty drum there unlabeled and label it when you start accumulating in it. That would keep you from having any violations. We do something similar to that where we have labels hanging on the wall next to the accumulation drums. So we start the accumulation of another drum. We pull out a label, put it on, put the appropriate labels on. So they're there when we start, and we put that accumulation start date on, or move the other one and make it a satellite accumulation area.
Okay, thank you. Then I've got two questions that are very similar, and you may have just kind of touched on it. Is a date required for satellite accumulation containers? Thought that was only for 90-day areas. And then the next one is a start date required for satellite accumulation areas. So maybe just cover that piece of it again.
No, dates are not required for satellite accumulation.
Okay.
Correct? Can't hear you, Tom.
Yeah, until they're full.
Correct. I'm going to jump to 1, 2 here, Jim. Somebody asked about episodic generation, because I know we're running short on time here.
Yeah.
Generator can have 2 episodic generation events in a year, in a calendar year. One can be planned, or one planned and one unplanned. So they can't be 2 planned and they can't be 2 unplanned. And there's notification requirements to the agencies when you're utilizing those episodic generator exemptions.
Okay. Here's another question. I don't know if Kevin, if you're looking at the sheet that I sent you, 15, is it acceptable to place a lid on an open head satellite drum that is not secure with a ring? And if not, why is that not different than the funnels with a hinged lid that is not fastened or secured?
We've received violations for having open top lids just being placed on it and not secured. And there is a secure mechanism on the funnel, at least, and with gaps on just a lid being placed on a drum, you'd have questions of organic emissions from that as well, where the funnels are supposed to close. Mostly I've seen the funnels used for satellite accumulation instead of, not storage drums. So I think you'd have discussions with your regulators on just putting a lid on a drum and not securing it.
Okay. We had a couple questions, I think, on the picture of, all the drums jammed together in front of the building. What are the requirements for aisle spacing?
You have to have adequate aisle space to respond to an emergency with personnel and equipment, and you need to be able to read the labels, and it's kind of, that's emergency one. The other aisle space is you need to be able to inspect each of the containers for proper labeling and leaking while they're in storage. There's no more specific than that. Some states are more specific with that in the aisle space width or other requirements, but that's what's in the federal regulations.
Okay. And then maybe just the last one here. Can training be done electronically through online learning modules?
Yes, they can, but you also need to be certain you're meeting your site-specific information. If you're a large quantity generator who has a contingency plan, you could get contingency plan emergency response training online, but that's not going to include the site-specific information that you need your employees to be aware of. Kind of moving off RCRA into hazard communication, the same thing with HazCom. There's specific requirements where you keep your SDSs, who's in charge of the program, that there are sites, you can use electronic, but most of it needs to be supplemented by some sort of on-site training.
Okay. All right, Tom and Kevin, thank you very much. Just everybody in closing here, the last couple seconds. Again, thank you for attending. Hopefully it was very helpful for you. We will be sending the copy of the deck as well as a link. Our next webinar will be in August. You can check our webpage on topic. It's either going to be solvent recycling or total waste management. I'm still kind of working on that piece. We're about to end things, but if you stay on for just a moment after we close, there's a short one-question survey on how we did, so please let us know. And this now officially ends the webinar, and thank you for attending.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.